On tonight's episode of the Talking TV podcast, we've got another tremendous celebrity interview coming up. We're talking to Sugith Varughese of Kim's Convenience and the Expanse fame. It's going to be nuts. I'm super pumped for this, and it hasn't even started yet. Of course, I'm Dom the movie nerd.
I'm Chris the TV nerd. If you guys are just tuning in and joining us, please feel free to ask Sugith the question in the chat. Anything you want, we'll be sure to work it in. Tonight is all free game, guys. Cannot wait to share this with you. Dom.
We're going to be talking about it all. This guy's got a long career, and we're very excited to get into it. So all that and more covered on tonight's episode. All right, good to see StreamYard's up to its usual tricks. What's going on, guys? Sugith, happy to have you here, dude.
I love your theme song there.
Oh, it's great, isn't it?
Now,
all props to this guy. All props to this guy right here.
Getting my surname correct, and Chris wins the prize for getting my first name correct.
Awesome.
Between the two, you got it right.
Perfect.
Now you understand why we're a duo. we need each other.
You're like the perfect two-headed interviewer.
Hey, thank you so much, man. And we haven't even really gotten started yet.
Well, what's funny about that is that's literally what every person has said about us since we started interviewing. Specifically, that goes all the way back to our first interview guest, Jeff Bryan of Survivor, who literally said that about us, like, after he was done. He's like, yeah, you guys make the perfect pair. He's like, because Chris is just down to earth enough to contain my energy. And I'm like, yeah, that basically sums us up.
Just from what you guys did with my name, I know. Well, that's how it's done.
Yes. Now you understand. Now you understand why this show does not work if it's just one of us involved.
So, Sugith, man, speaking of your name, it's something that's been popping into my zeitgeist radar, as I like to call it, quite a lot recently. I am a huge fan of a little show, not so little anymore, let's just be honest, called Kim's Convenience. It is my number one go-to before bed sitcom at this point in my life, meaning I binge it endlessly because I love it so much. And then I found out you were on The Expanse, and then I realized that you have a history of writing in your past, and then I thought, hey, we got to speak to this guy if he's willing enough to come on the show, because it really seems like you figured out a way to create your own and forge your own career in the arts, the performing arts rather, which is such a competitive and difficult field. So if you could take us back to sort of and work your way through to present day, like what was your first inspiration? You know, when did you first like sort of trek out and know this was like your path, and sort of spare no expense, like any detail is welcomed here. We love to kind of know the Sugith story.
So I was born in India, and my family came to Canada when I was a year old. So I grew up in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is not the showbiz capital of the world. And so I ended up, I don't know why, really, other than it just worked out this way. But I ended up, I'm a son of immigrants, Indian background. What do you do when you go to university? Pre-med. So I was a pre-med student, but I also ticked off drama. And so I was the first pre-med drama double major at the University of Saskatchewan. So I did all the pre-med classes, I did all the drama classes, and then I realized I didn't want to go to medical school right away, because you could back then. You could apply to medical school after 1 year, and it was too soon for me. Luckily, my dad was a doctor, his father was a doctor, I got an uncle who was a doctor, I got two cousins who were a doctor. Thankfully, my younger sister became a doctor, so I was off the hook, and I sort of went into the arts, though I didn't really know I was going into the arts professionally. I was just kind of, interested in that in university. And it goes back to, I did high school plays, and when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I did, my parents enrolled me in a creative drama class, God knows why, but it really somehow mattered to me, as a kid, and at that time I was the only brown kid in my school. And I guess it allowed me to feel like I belonged in some way, because I wasn't really good at sports. And sort of that's where I felt, okay, this is something I like to do. And it just, unfolded like that as I got older. by the time I graduated from university, I'd gone to the University of Minnesota. You know, like I said, Saskatoon wasn't the showbiz capital of the world. So I went to the States to study theater, and I wanted to get into film school and a graduate film program. I wrote a little script because I didn't have an uncle who was a film producer. I didn't have a movie camera, but I had a typewriter. That's how old I am, but way before computers. So I wrote this little script just as a way to try and get into a film school somewhere. And I got into a film school in Toronto called York University in their graduate program. And because I had written something, I found a way to get it to a producer at the CBC, and they liked my little script, and they invited me to pitch an idea for an episode of a TV series they were producing. So I went in and I was locked in a room and watched this pilot on a VHS tape. And while I was waiting to be unlocked from the room, I came up with an idea for an episode, and I sold it. Having never written anything but that little script that I had used as a sample before. And that's how I started in television. I broke in as a writer. A couple of years later, after I'd done my first drama, I pitched another idea for a movie for CBC to the same producer. And it was about an Indian Canadian guy who'd grown up here. And so I wrote that, and then we found out that we couldn't cast it because back then there were no brown actors. So they proposed casting a guy named Howie Mandel and painting him brown. And I said, wait a minute.
Yeah, that's a little questionable.
He's not Indian, I don't think. So I begged to have a chance at auditioning for my own movie, and I auditioned, I got the part. And so I started my own movie, and this is like 1983. And that's how I started acting. So since then, I've basically done both acting and writing. Some years the writing is up, and some years the acting is up. Lately, it's been acting more than writing, but I am writing some stuff. And you talk about, carving a career in the arts. I would say that's why I have a career in the arts, given that I am the least likely. I mean, I got the world's worst show business name. I'm not a handsome white guy. I didn't grow up in an entertainment center. I didn't come from a family of artists. And, the reason I had a career in the arts was I diversified. I wrote, I acted, I went to the Canadian Film Center as a director. I directed shorts, I directed kids drama. And I've basically done all three for 30 years. And that's how I have a career in the arts. So, I encourage anybody who, it doesn't matter whether you're a brown kid from Saskatoon or not, but anybody, that diversification certainly was the key to my ability to have a career. And I would propose that everybody try and diversify because, all your eggs in one basket is a scary way to get through, make a living.
Oh man, so many different things that I want to unpack there just about that. That was like an entire life story comprised into like a few sentences. That's insane. Just like insane. So like, I guess kind of like to bounce off of that, like what is it that I guess just like kind of drove you? So you've specialized primarily in acting and writing. So I guess throughout, like, cause I've actually, if I have to be completely honest, that's kind of the area that I'd like to kind of focus in as well for the kind of duration of my career. That's kind of the thing that I've had to break down. There's everyone's like, oh, well, what do you want to focus in the arts? It's like, I don't want to focus necessarily in anything. I want to like learn all these different things that way I can, like, because that's going to like be able to, give me a career and give me all these different options potentially is, the more you're just better off that way. But I guess kind of my question is, what would you say you're drawn to more with writing and acting? And what do you see as like kind of, what is it about each of those respective fields that you feel kind of you enjoy about each of them?
See, and I've said this before, if I had to fill out my passport and say what my profession was, I work as a writer, I work as an actor, I work as a director, I'd put professional storyteller. Because after doing this for a long time, I realized that each of those jobs, writing, acting, directing, it's the same job. And the job is storytelling. And if you work in the business, you realize that's the same job for anybody. The costume designer is a storyteller. They're telling the story through clothes. The production designer is a storyteller. They're telling the story through the sets. The DOP is a storyteller. He's telling the story through light and composition. So I am a storyteller as a writer because I'm working with story on the page. When I get to direct, now I'm directing with a camera. I mean, I'm storytelling with a camera. And if I'm acting, I'm storytelling in front of the camera. And it's the same job. It requires different skills, and not everybody can do all those jobs, at least, and get paid to do them. But I would say anybody who works in the business for some length of time actually understands that that's fundamentally the job that they're doing. And so what I would say to you and anybody who says, how do you do that, is learn to be a storyteller. Because storytelling is what will inform how you execute any of those jobs. And if you don't understand story, if you just think, okay, I got to be cool and pretty and on camera, and that's what acting is, well, you'll have a brief, maybe successful, but brief career, you know? But if you're able to be a storyteller as an actor, you're going to be a creative collaborator. You're going to be able to have a conversation with the director about how, you know, they're trying to tell the story too, about how to tell the story the most effective way possible. You using your acting job, and he or she using their directing job, and hopefully the writer has done their storytelling job well enough that you're now lifting that off the page, and it becomes a team effort. So I would say that's the key. It's about learning, understanding, focusing, and getting expertise at storytelling.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very, very profound sentiment as well. It's kind of like, right, I'm more on the musical side of things. So I'm learning how to do podcast audio editing at the same time as I'm learning music production, and I'm learning how to, work with clients and record. You can't stay because it's very competitive. I think Hollywood kind of does a disservice with how glamorous they make the rolling of the red carpet out to young creators, seeing the glitz, the glamour, the dresses I think they kind of give a false interpretation of how difficult it is to get to that level, to be a Brad Pitt. You have to have chops.
There's a lot of luck in getting it to any level, but particularly that level. I have a lot of friends and colleagues who are, I consider myself extremely lucky. I know that that's what I've done the right things in order to be lucky. You know what I mean? I've worked really hard to be this lucky. But there's lots of people who are as talented, or probably more talented than me, who aren't as lucky. And I don't know what to say about it. That's just the way it works. I am eternally grateful for the opportunities that I was given and took advantage of. Right. So I think you're right that the glamorous perspective that is painted about the business is completely false. What's interesting is if you watched, we just had the Golden Globes last night.
Yeah.
And you watch the Golden Globes and you realize half of those movie stars and TV stars are sitting at home. Jason Sudeikis is in his hoodie. And you realize, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. And fundamentally, that's who everybody who is working in the business are. They're just trying to do a job. Some of us are more successful than others, which has nothing to do with our talent and mostly to do with our luck. But we're just trying to do this job. And we're grateful to have that job because it's a fun job. I would pay to do my job if I didn't get paid to do it. But it's still a job, and it requires expertise and skill and training and the right attitude. One of the things that I say about people who work in this business, because I used to teach a bit at the college level, and I realized that so many of those aspiring kids were not employable because they didn't have the right attitude. It wasn't that they weren't talented. It was that, they had bought into a kind of expectation of, I'm a genius, or I got, it's a glamorous business or whatever. And, the homework wasn't being done. Right. And our business is mostly about doing homework.
Yeah,
know?
very, very true. Makes
No,
sense.
you're 100% on the money there. So I guess kind of just walk us through. So kind of, I mean, obviously, again, like you just started. You got started in what, 83? You said you got started. So you've been in this.
I sold my first drama, the one that I was locked in the room to pitch.
Right.
That was 1980. So
yeah, 1980.
Wow.
So you've been in this business a long time. You've been in this business now, like that makes it like 41 years as you've been doing this a long time. So like kind of,
I am
guess,
a pioneer.
Yeah, I was about to say, no, if we had the time, like I would go through like each and every bit of your filmography on your way there, but kind of walk us through. So obviously, what's it called? So you landed the Expanse first, right? Before Kim's, because you've been involved with, even though you just got cast.
Well, it's hard to time it because I started on Kim's, in season 1, and it's about the same time that I started on the Expanse, but I wasn't on camera.
Right.
When the Expanse started, I was hired to be one of the background voices. It's a job called looping. And this is what I talk about diversification. I mean, it's not a movie star job. There are people who spend their whole careers just doing looping. And I actually have been looping since, I don't know, the early 90s. I've done whole seasons of TV series since then. And I think that's why they asked me to be one of the group that they brought in to do the Expanse loop job. So I've been looping the Expanse since the pilot. So it's about the same time when the Expanse started, because they're in season 5 and Kim's Convenience started, and they're in season 5 now. So yeah, it's about the same time. I don't know which was first though.
Got it. Yeah. So as far as the looping goes, kind of like, so you've said you've worked on a lot of other shows. Like, are there any shows that any shows that we would know of that you've done loops for?
Shows like Flashpoint, Anne of Green Gables, Forever Night, which was a vampire show in the early 90s. I mean, you name it.
Wow,
that's crazy. So again, like that's just how you end up getting the Expanse, because again, just like that network that you formed, and again, you're doing it for so long. Obviously,
Well, it's a skill set that is pretty unique, because you have to be able to improvise on cue without knowing really what's going on, and also on occasion match what somebody on screen, like somebody in the background. So you have the cop of the police station, they've got a bunch of people in the background while Brad Pitt and somebody are talking in the foreground like this. There's 25 people in the background. You got to pick that one guy with the white hair and match his lip movements, making sense with what you're saying, but it's never really heard clearly.
Right.
Because Brad Pitt's dialogue is prominent. But I always said, if you turned up the mix in a different way, it'd still be an interesting story.
It would be. It's true, because every single one of those person, what they're saying matters.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't just say stupid stuff. You got to actually talk about the forensics, or the report has to go up to the DA or whatever it is.
Yeah, all that stuff is important.
But in sync with however this background person on the day moved their lips. So,
true.
It's not a job that everybody can do. And so if you are able to do it, you get to do it a lot.
No, totally. I think that I didn't expect it to start off this way, but I feel inspired. I mean, I want to go write a song right after this. I think this is really cool information for people who like Dom and a bunch of our peers who want to sort of break into the realm that you've been in for quite some time. And before we get too far away from your origins, one last thing I kind of wanted to ask you, and then we're going to talk about all like the really fun stuff, why I'm sure people are here, the Expanse, Kim's Convenience, and you have a few other shows too.
I used to write for the Muppets.
I was going to say that too. I was going to say Fraggle Rock as well.
I was one of the original writers for a TV series called Fraggle Rock.
Oh my God, that's insane!
5 years ago, yeah, I wrote 10 episodes of Fraggle
Holy
Rock.
Shit.
Jim directed one of my shows.
That's insane! Wow! Oh my God!
So before we get too far away from your early years, because we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah,
I am curious about what it was like working as a creative professional in Canada, being so close to the United States. You stayed in Canada, right? You didn't ever move to LA. Was that difficult to sort of, make a career out of it? Because now the Canadian film industry, you have shows like Letterkenny and of course Schitt's Creek kind of opened the floodgates.
blew up.
And now Canada, I would say, isn't just the place that like the CW shows go to shoot and produce. They have amazing content being produced and written in the country itself, but I'm sure it had to be one of the many challenges that you faced early on. So what was sort of like your decision making there, and was it as hard to navigate as I'm saying? Or
I did seriously consider trying to get a green card to move to Los Angeles in the mid 90s. And, it's one of these things where sometimes life does what it does. I was born in India, and I'm a Canadian citizen. So I'd go to the U.S. consulate in Toronto to apply for a green card, and that year they wouldn't let people born in India apply because they would always change who was eligible each year. So that year, Indian nationals couldn't apply. All right. So I come back next year, and that year, Canadian citizens couldn't apply.
Wow.
So after this goes on for a couple,
you were just getting done dirty all
sort of
around.
Coddled, like for 4 or 5 years, I sort of grew too established here to sort of throw that all away then and move. But a lot of people do make the move, and a lot of writers, sadly, are, I think, moving to LA and finding more success because the shows that are shot in Canada end up being written in LA, and they're all working on those. So I think it's a big tragedy that brain drain, talent drain continues. It's interesting with COVID that kind of stopped things happening for a while, but it probably will revamp once we're through this. And it's difficult to say I would say if you're a writer, it's very tempting to consider moving to LA just because of how the business works. If you're an actor, if I was talking to somebody in their late 20s, early 30s who had done, 10 or 20 shows in Canada, have 10 or 20 credits in Canada, I'd say, you should consider it if you're talking professionally. For me, it wasn't just a professional decision. It was also a lifestyle decision. It was things were, good enough in Canada that I just sort of toughed it out. And now it's pretty good. So I'm not making any plans to move, but I totally understand people who do.
Yeah,
For sure.
No, definitely. So kind of walk us through. So you said, you got Kim's as around the same time that you did the Expanse. So I guess kind of walk us through you walked us through how you got the Expanse. So now I guess walk us through the process of how you ended up landing on Kim's.
Well, I had done, I think Kim's is my third CBC sitcom, and I had been called in to audition for a part when the series was about to start filming, which I didn't get. It was a friend of Mr. Kim's, and I didn't get that part. It happens. I licked my wounds and went on to something else. And then about halfway through season 1, they called my agent and said, there's this other part, and we're going to show the network his original audition, and if they like it, he'll come in and do that. It's one episode, it'll do that other part, who was also a friend of Mr. Kim's. So that's what happened. They called the next day and said, okay, we'll have him do this other part, Mr. Mehta. And I went in and we did a rehearsal. I rehearsed with Paul for half an hour a few days later. And Paul and I had worked, it turned out, on a movie about 6 months earlier. We're both barely in this movie, but we spent a night out on a street because it was a big accident scene. He played the cop, I played the drunk driver, but the camera was really on the leads of the movie, and we were like in the background. So we basically spent a night improvising a whole little movie of our own just to amuse ourselves. So I knew Paul really well by the time I went in to meet him for Kim's, and we had instant chemistry. It appears, and as soon as we finished the rehearsal, they called and said, okay, we want to book him for 2 more episodes. And when I got the scripts for those 2 episodes, I realized that the dialogue was the same as the original character I auditioned for and didn't get. So clearly something had happened on the creative side, that they cast somebody and they didn't really have the chemistry that they had hoped for. And so they called me in, and I ended up, now I've done 20, 30 episodes of Kim's Convenience doing this part, Mr. Mehta. So it worked out.
Yeah, it's funny how
again, it's one of these things where, like I said, I worked really hard to get lucky.
Yeah, no, it's really funny that you bring that up because it's funny, we had John Eck, another star of the show, on a couple weeks ago, and I was telling him I listened to the Talking Sopranos podcast, which is Steve Schirripa and Michael Imperioli, 2 of the stars of the Sopranos, are breaking down that show and going through each episode week by week. And the amount of times that I have heard now about that, whenever they audition a new actor for a part, and an actor comes in and they may not get the part, but that they auditioned for, but the director or the casting agent liked the actor so much that they end up putting the actor in a different part, and the actor usually ends up getting some of the same dialogue that they've usually already read. They just don't. It's just been modified towards them because it's modified for the actor. You know, it's just certain of these little things that I'm starting to notice as I'm like hearing more and more about the business.
So TV is often a work in progress. So they rolled the dice on somebody originally, and you know, it didn't work out. So they knew what I could do, and they just rolled the dice again, and it worked out this time. So sometimes these things are really a big orchestrated plan, and sometimes it just, they make it up as they go along.
Yeah, totally. I mean, one of my favorite shows is Lost. I don't know how familiar you are with the production behind that type of show, but I feel like you just essentially hit the nail on the head there with the whole, the creators wanted it ended after 3 seasons. The network said, no, we're booking you for 9, and they had to settle somewhere in the middle at 6. And it's just kind of...
They never explained the damn polar bear.
Nope, they never explained the goddamn polar bear. Thank you.
Oh, man. Hey, they tried. They came up with the zoo and all that. I feel like it's...
No.
Too weak for you as a writer? Too weak for you?
You don't understand. This just made me so happy. You have no idea how happy you just made me, because
you realize Lost is a good example that they probably had the polar bear worked out, but because of all of these external forces that affected the architecture of the series, the polar bear got lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true.
Oh my God, the Lost. But it's so funny. I told Chris after I watched the show for the first time, because I finished season 4, and up until that point, season 4 was my favorite season of the show after the first season. And then after I finished 5 and 6, I'm like, yeah, they should have ended it in 4. 4 to me, until Ben moves the island, was the logical conclusion of like just where that show should have ended. Like, if we're just going on our Lost tangent side note, that is kind of inevitable just based on our individual tastes.
To me, it just feels like, and maybe Sugith, I love your sort of take on this, being someone who's kind of seen the writer side and the actor side of working with a network for longer periods of time. But to me, it just kind of seems like an outsider's perspective, rather, that there was just so much battling that they had to do with the studio to just get it to a point where they could end it successfully, that there was no way they could have picked up all the pieces properly. I mean, I think the show's brilliant because they kept the mystery going till the very end, but I do think it's unfortunate that they had to deal with that added stress that I think no creator really should have to deal with. But that's when there's money involved. That's the name of the game sometimes, of just, we don't know what's quite happening with our creation, with our baby.
There's a political aspect to all of these things. The network is spending money, so they want to say the creators are, they thought it through. There's probably a production company that's banking, bankrolling it to some degree, because networks don't pay 100% of the budget. They're only licensing shows, and so everybody's got a say in this, and everybody thinks they're a genius sometimes. And so given what I know, when a show works, I'm amazed, because there's so many moving parts, and often moving parts with the best of intentions, that can cause things to derail. So when you look at something like Schitt's Creek, which is just almost perfect in its execution from episode 1 to the end, or Fleabag, or some of these shows that are really, and The Expanse too, you realize that it's not a fluke, but there's a lot of things that just came together perfectly to allow that kind of success to play out. And one wrong move in casting, or one mistake in a creative decision, which at the time, you look at my story about Kim's Convenience, they made a decision that they were able to pivot on, luckily, but maybe, if they weren't able to, sometimes you can't, because the actor has a 7, I was cast in an ABC pilot, and I had to sign a contract for a 7-year deal, whether I got the part or not. So if they have to pay the actor for 7 years, they may live with a mistake. And that show then may not last 7 years. And there's a lot of horror stories about that. So there's a million things that can go wrong, and not necessarily because you've got bad actors involved. It's, just things happen.
Yeah.
So I would say that when shows are successful, celebrate them because, it's so hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's
What do you?
funny
What do you?
because
Speaking of that, what before we get too far away from it, Don brought up Kim's Convenience. What do you think is the magic behind Kim's Convenience, in your opinion?
Authenticity. I think that why Kim's, and I think this is true for a lot of successful shows, they stayed true to themselves. They didn't try to pander or be something for what they thought the audience wants. They, when I started on the show, I thought this is a lovely little show that will be successful maybe in the 416 area code. I mean, it's such a unique love letter story for Toronto, but I don't know anybody in Moose Jaw who would get it, really, would they? Moose Jaw, try Indonesia. They love the show.
Yeah.
And yet it is so specifically authentic to that particular place and people that you couldn't transplant, somewhere else. I mean, you could do a New Delhi version of Kim's Convenience, but it would have to be really New Delhiized. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You could do it. And just like The Office does that. I mean, there's, 30 versions of The Office floating around in space because each country made their own version. And that can be done, but you have to make it feel like it's not just rewritten with Italian names, but it's, coming from that new place of authenticity. So I think that's why Kim's Convenience works, is that they never lost touch of what makes it authentic.
Yeah, it's crazy because, just about Kim's, I told my cousin, but I made a post about Kim's, me finally watching the show on my Facebook of my cousin, who, I never in a million years thought would have stumbled up. He's like, "Oh, I love this show," and I texted him, I'm like, "Hey, just so you know, we're interviewing 2 people for the show," and he's like, "Oh, cool, which ones?" And I told him who, and he was freaking out because he knows every character on the show. But no, back to your point about kind of whenever you have a good TV show, celebrate it. It's funny because I'm actually launching a separate spin-off podcast of this called Talking Thrones in about a month in order to celebrate Game of Thrones for its 10-year anniversary. And I kind of want to break down that show and kind of figure out what went wrong specifically towards the end. But ever since that show ended, I've been getting into so many different shows. After I finished Game of Thrones, I finished The Wire for the first time. I really got into Mad Men. I got into The Americans. I'm getting into The Leftovers.
The other thing I would say is it's not just, the reason that there is an authentic execution of a successful show tends to be because there is I wouldn't say there's a singular vision, but there's a cohesive vision. So I used to write for the Muppets, and Fraggle Rock was successful in its time because everybody who worked on that show was executing a very particular vision. We weren't all doing our own version of something. We were doing that show, and we bought into that vision. And there were a lot of writers that dreamed of writing for the Muppets and were given the opportunity, and they never succeeded because they couldn't buy into, they wanted to, but they weren't able to buy into the vision of the show and execute something that was consistent with that vision. So I think those are the 2 keys. It's having a singular vision and executing it authentically. And if you can have that happening, then I think you have a chance at a successful show.
And I'm also kind of getting some of that old adage of there's no I in team, which
Correct.
I think obviously is self-explanatory, but there's every movie has thousands of names at the credits, but why do some go on to live forever and some kind of live and die in that moment that they're released?
In fact, I would say when you have somebody who believes that they are the visionary, that's a 2-season show. If you have somebody who embraces the collaborators to execute their vision, then you have a 4, 5, 6-season show.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly, especially since you've had some certain shows that end up switching showrunners halfway through, and then the new showrunner comes in, and it's a breath of fresh air, and it feels like you're watching a whole new show, and the show could be I remember that was a big thing with Veep, where Veep, I know Armando Iannucci left that show after season 4, I think.
Right.
And the new showrunner that came in for season 5 was one of the guys who worked on Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I heard that it was like, it gave that show like a whole new surge for its last couple seasons, you know?
Yeah, except that the other thing is it was a seamless transition. Because I think forget his name, David, the second
David
show.
Mandel, right?
David Mandel.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think he had written for Veep before he became the showrunner, but he wasn't the showrunner. And you're right, Armando Iannucci was, and he left. But I think there was a seamless overlap of those of them, and that again, the singular vision wasn't dependent on one person. It was a vision that existed, right?
Right.
Like that show was so clearly thought through and so clearly defined and so authentic. It was particularly specific. As soon as you turn on Veep, it's a Veep show, right? It's not The West Wing, right? They're both political drama, comedy dramas in a way, set in Washington D.C. But you can just look at a frame and you know which one is which.
Exactly.
That's how specific they are. And it's that specificity and authenticity and singular vision that enables any creative to then decide whether they can be a part of it, So on Veep, David Mandel didn't write every episode,
right?
But everybody who wrote under David Mandel or everybody who wrote under Armando Iannucci wrote within that vision. So when I wrote Fraggle Rock, Jerry Jewell was our showrunner, and I had to make sure that I was executing Jerry Jewell's show, but it was still my script. I wrote every word of every draft of my scripts. We didn't have the room that they have on shows now. We were each individually responsible for our episodes, and it was creative collaboration in that Jerry and rubber stamped everything that I did, but it didn't go through his computer, right? So I was able to buy into his vision and execute a vision and yet still tell a story that only I could tell. So people who know the show really well, at least the people who worked on the show, could always tell, oh, that's a Sugith script. Oh, that's a David Young script. Oh, that's a BP Nichols script, because of the ideas and themes and specifics. But they were all Fraggle Rock scripts.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a hard thing to execute, because it's not like you can do it mechanically. It comes from who's involved. I mean, Jerry Jewell, if you ever met Jerry Jewell, he was this special person. He's like a David Mandel or any of these sort of great showrunners who's able to define a singular vision and then make sure that the collaborators who came in on that singular vision were able to do it. And if you were, then you're part of the family. And if you weren't, then you couldn't be part of the family.
Right. Yeah, no, it's true. Like I've heard that, and how that story's been told about, like, again, David Chase and what he was able to pull off with The Sopranos, and how that eventually, like, kind of you're still seeing the trickle down effects of what The Sopranos did today, like just all of that, and everyone has talked about just again like how effectively how David oversaw every single decision there. So I wanted to kind of walk through kind of like the process, because again, so you've been in the writer's room, you've been both behind the scenes and on set. So I guess kind of walk us through the process as far as like, so you get to work as far as like for the let's say for the writing process per se. So you get to work, right? You work on your script, you submit it. Like, I just walk us through the process of like getting the words on the page to seeing your words on the screen. Walk us through that process.
Well, my experience is a bit dated in that there was no writer's room when I wrote. I wrote a lot of television in the 80s and 90s, and it wasn't a writer's room back then. It was a freelance kind of situation. And the process then, and it's similar now. The only difference is that now the whole team of writers assists in breaking down the season, in defining what's going to happen over the episodes. Right. When I was doing primarily television writing, the showrunner did that. And they would plug my script in the right spot. But the episodes weren't particularly serialized. I mean, there was an overall arc, but it wasn't like a Lost where each episode you got to watch the order.
Do you know
So
real
in my
quick
case,
when that change started to commence, like the transition
really,
from more freelance
really
to writer's room?
around the year two. I mean, it was in place in LA for a long time, but it really, moved into the Canadian television scene around the year 2000, the year 98, 99, 2000. When
Sounds
it,
about right. When you
Makes
have
sense.
like
Yeah.
X-Files starting to have
Yeah,
different
that's
little bits
X-Files,
trickle from
Sopranos comes
episodes.
on the scene, Sex and
Yeah.
the City's on the scene,
Well,
like the
then you
whole
have
television thing is
then you have a
shifting.
real writing room. But in either case, besides breaking down the season, the other thing is the difference is that now the credited writer may not be the person who actually wrote the script. When I was working, the credited writer was the only person who wrote the script. So that's changed. Like I went through that transition. I wrote for a series called Blue Murder, and that was around that 1999 2000 era. And so I would get rewritten by the showrunner, but I still get the sole writing credit. Yet, I mean, it was pretty much what I wrote, but not exactly. Whereas when I was writing Fraggle Rock, which was in the 80s, every word was mine, and from the time it got to the screen. So the process in either case was you have to come up with an idea for an episode. And you pitch that idea to a showrunner. I used to wrote for a series called Blobheads, and it was an animated live action combination kids show. But this kid who had a pair of aliens who turned up in the bathroom in his room because that was their transition portal to their planet.
That's awesome.
Nice.
It was a funny idea, and the showrunner was a friend of mine, and I came in with 12 ideas for an episode, and I said, "Okay, so I'll start with my favorite." And he stopped me. He says, "Don't ever say that." I said, "Why?" Because what if it's not my favorite?
Yeah,
it's not a bad point.
No, it's not. Now, I have one last question in this sort of area that we're in before I do want to obviously jump into the Expanse and sort of talk about that a little bit as well. The serialization of television, that I guess we all kind of just said together came out in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Do you think that, maybe there wasn't a need for the writer's room that you hear so much about now back in the days of more procedural, oriented content, or are you kind of envious that you didn't have that experience of sort of the hive mind of building it out together and getting a feel for your fellow staff members and then going off on your own and sort of adding your stamp to that specific section?
Well, I don't know if I'm envious. I kind of had my own experience, and that experience was having both the responsibility and credit for my scripts be mine. And now I don't think TV writers even have that experience. So they have a different one. And it's an interesting one. I think your point was interesting because so many more shows now are serialized versus when I was writing television, where things really were more episodic. I mean, the only thing that was serialized really that you had to watch in order were soap operas. You didn't really watch prime time. You didn't have to watch prime time in order because there was no binging. You watched one episode a week, and the next one wasn't going to show up until a week later. So it was almost stupid to serialize because what if somebody missed an episode? Then you would get letters. Not emails. There was no email back then. Yep. You get letters.
I had to write letters.
Right. And so episodic was so really what television was. I mean, the network didn't want to have to show episodes in a certain order. They wanted the freedom to be able to do whatever they wanted, because what if it get preempted? All sorts of things. And back then there were so few networks. It wasn't 500 different networks. There were 4. Or 5 or whatever. So it's a very different thing. The one thing I will say is that it was wonderful to be part of that era and to do that kind of writing. And I think it's just as wonderful to be part of the modern era and do that kind of writing, but it is very different.
Very interesting. Yeah. So we've kind of covered both aspects of your career. Is there one where your heart feels more drawn to than the other? Was one more out of necessity to sort of survive and make a living? Or if you had your pick, you wouldn't change anything. You would both write and direct and act.
Well, I suppose if I had to choose, I'd prefer to direct more because that's the most fun. Writing is really hard. It's really hard.
I can say that from personal experience. It is. I'm going to go one step further. Writing is a bitch. It is so bad.
It's really hard. I'm writing a feature now. It's in development anyway. And, I stare at the screen and I'm going, why am I doing this? This is so hard. Just, if I'm an actor, they just give me the script and I can go off and do it. It's fun. But, the hard part about acting is getting the job. Anybody can become a writer. You just have to start and wait until beads of blood pop out on your forehead while staring at a computer screen. But that's
been there.
That's writing, right? You may not get paid for it necessarily, but if you keep at it, you will eventually. So it's everybody's going to have their own story. You guys are going to have your own story, and it's impossible. Like I see online, these questions from aspiring writers or aspiring actors, even seeking the correct path that you sort of take to become a working professional in the business. And what I say is there is no correct path because no working professional ever got to take it. Every working professional I know has their own story.
Yep.
Somebody is the nephew of a producer, and that's why they're, on a show. Somebody else clawed their way through and, cold called everybody they could. And I know people who literally had no experience and cold called their way and became professional writers from cold calling. And then somebody else was like me who kind of had a bit of a sample and then had the luck of being in a school that had a producer double, moonlighting as a prof, and got my script to him, and then he got it to the network, and I was able to, got the chance to pitch. And if my pitch had sucked, I would be selling insurance for 4 years later. So who knows? I mean, it's just such a fluky business. The only thing I can say is luck is important, but it doesn't happen because of luck. It happens because you prepared and you worked really hard and you had that sample script ready to go when you entered the elevator with Steven Spielberg. You had the skill set to being an actor when the network calls twice and says, okay, you know what? We screwed up the first time. We'll recast and put him in the part. And you're able to deliver, and so getting back to The Expanse, for example, it's a shame that you haven't seen it, but I'm in the last half of season 5. When I was cast, I auditioned with dialogue from season 2, not my character at all. And they liked what I did with that. So then they invited me to audition for the showrunner and the pilot. I mean the episode director, and brought in an actor to read opposite me. And then they gave me, the piece of text or the script from the real episode. And that was the first time I even saw what they were looking for in terms of content, right? And they cast me, and I shot that episode. And then 2 episodes later, I get this new episode. And if you see the series, you go, holy shit, how did they know I was going to be able to pull this off? Because it's such a leap content-wise and requiring acting skills that they didn't know I had, or they didn't see in the first episode I did. And the same thing happened on this show that I do now called Transplant. When I first was cast, I got to do the first 2 episodes, and there was, I'm sort of play the senior surgeon who crushes dreams, and I had no idea where they were going to take that character, and I'm in the show, right? And by the time the 10th episode script showed up, and I read it, and I went, what? Oh my God. And I went to the showrunner. I said, Joe, thank you. This is amazing. I had no idea you were going to go here. I mean, this is how, and Joe is like that. He likes to keep things close to his chest in terms of, and you know what? It worked. I mean, here we are. So you never know how these things play out. You just have to be ready.
Absolutely.
And by ready means trained, prepared, professional, the right attitude, able to deliver, even though you didn't know you'd have to. Like I said, getting back to The Expanse, that second episode I'm in requires acting stuff that I had no idea I knew I could do it, but I didn't know they knew I could do it. And yet they wrote it.
That's impressive. Yeah. It's funny. I was literally just hearing a story about this on the podcast today about like kind of directors almost making actors think that they've made certain choices when in reality they're just like baiting them towards those certain choices in order to kind of get what they want. But that, again, that just shows that like when a creator is good and they know what they're doing, like this is the result you get.
Particularly in television, but it's true for movies too. There's an illusion that the director is,
casting.
He's casting, but directing the performance. The responsibility for the performance is mine.
Right.
Nobody's going to tell me. I mean, it's not an attitude thing. They don't want to have to tell you how to act. They want you to do that. They want you to bring all of that stuff because it's not their job. It's your job.
Right.
You don't. And I learned this a long time ago. I did a movie with Dennis Hopper, the great Dennis Hopper.
Oh, rest in peace, that guy.
And the director, apparently, who cast me, was fired shortly after they started shooting. And it was a young guy who I don't think has ever directed anything since.
Ouch,
and they brought in the cinematographer, who was a very well-known cinematographer. He worked on Alien and a bunch of other movies. He ended up directing the film. And I realized, because I do this scene with Dennis Hopper. You don't direct Dennis Hopper.
Right.
Dennis Hopper can direct himself, thank you very much.
Yeah. He did in the movie that made him famous,
Right. So you realize that's how it works. You're not, it's not community theater where the director is trying to mold performances out of amateurs who don't know how to act. In our business, everybody should be able to do the job, and that's what they're hiring you to do.
Yeah.
Accountability seems to be.
That's 100% right. And because the other thing too that I've heard is that what's it called? The number one thing that a director never wants to do is tell an actor how to do their job, and vice versa. When
I direct, I don't want to have to do that.
Exactly.
First of all, it means that I have either cast the wrong person if they're not sort of doing it, or, which is bad enough because that's on me, or the actor hasn't done their homework to know what this scene calls for. Now, if that's the case, we try and fix that by explaining what's going on in the scene. But I remember once one of my mentors, I was at the Canadian Film Center as a director, and one of my mentors was Dan Petrie Sr., and he directed all sorts of great films like Raisin in the Sun and, The Clockmaker, and all these fantastic movies. And as an exercise, they had brought in a couple of actors to do a scene with a crew, and I was supposed to direct this. And Dan stood at the back watching and making notes. And I ran over to the actor at one point. I said, and I was having trouble. I couldn't explain what I wanted. And I said, do you mind if I give you a line reading? And he was fine. He said, yeah, sure. So I gave him the line reading, and then we went on. So at the postmortem at lunch, Dan Petrie Sr. gets up and says, don't you ever fucking do that again. I said, why not? I was able to get the take. And he says, if you had gone to the actor and said, can I give you a line reading? What if he'd said no? Then your authority as a director is completely shot. You might as well go home. And the crew will just continue on doing this without you because you don't have any credibility left. So you got to find a better, smarter way to get what you want out of that actor than saying, can I give you a line reading? So that's when I realized, oh, that's my job as an actor. It's not the director's job to, do that. And that's where I get to this thing where, it's all the same job, directing, acting, writing. It's all storytelling. It's all storytelling. And that's a sort of an aspect of the overlap on the professional side. I don't want to be given a line reading as an actor because that means I'm screwing up or the director screwed up in some way, and it's going to create tension on the set, and you don't want that. You want a collaborative atmosphere, not not a, ooh, am I making a mistake atmosphere, right?
Right.
And so there's a lot of these kinds of balls that are in the air when you're working in the business. And the people who work in the business over time are the people who understand how to keep those balls in the air. And the people who don't work in the business over time don't understand how to keep those balls in the air.
Yeah, no, for sure.
100% true.
Now, we're running short on time here, but I do have sort of at least one last question for you from me. With your experience, wearing so many different hats over the course of your career, The Expanse, there's a lot of space.
I was about to say, pun intended. Very good pun right there.
You cannot buy this in a store.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Crew, yeah.
That's awesome.
But you cannot buy this hat. Okay, wearing the hat. Go on.
Yeah, no, because I was going to say there's a lot of science fiction shows, and I think with the advent of streaming, we've gotten a lot more. But this show, it seems to stand out amongst the rest, The Expanse. I have a film, we're friends with our former film professor who went to NYU for writing, and he watches a lot of sci-fi. He does not talk about a lot of the sci-fi he watches, but he talks about The Expanse quite a bit. What do you think is the magic of this show, in your opinion?
They don't mess with the science, for one thing. There's no beam me up. There are no aliens per se. All of even the spaceships and how they execute them visually is scientifically accurate and correct. Things like when a spaceship and the Expanse fires a gun, they make sure that the engine fires thrust just before the gun goes off, so that otherwise the gun would force a spaceship to go shooting, 5,000 meters in the other direction. They can't do that. Now, Star Wars, they're breaking every science rule that exists. So that show appeals for a whole other reason. So that's the first thing, I think, is that The Expanse doesn't mess with the science. The second thing is The Expanse is based on these really great books. So what it's about has been thought through by the original book writers for a long time. So they are playing the long game on that show, and they're seeding all of this stuff that they know where the show is going. We may not as we watch the show, but it's really engaging as we see it unfold. And then by the time you get to season 4 and you realize, holy crap, that was seeded in season 1. I remember that. And now it's paying off in season 4. I mean, when you got that kind of stuff going on, plus the science is accurate, it's fantastic. And, it's great characters. The even my character, it surprises you, and you don't see what I end up doing coming. And that applies to almost every character. I mean, it does apply to every character on that series, but particularly the series leads, the ones the show's telling the story about, where they start, and as they unfold, you just get more and more connected to them because of how interesting and how moving and how engaging they are as characters. So I think those are the 3 components, and that's hard to pull off, but The Expanse does it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just from the little that I've seen of the show, like I could already tell. I'm like, yeah, this is setting itself apart. It's funny because I will definitely say that, like, certain of the TV shows, certain of the new TV shows that I saw from the last couple of years were starting to disappoint me, as far as I'm like, I feel like this isn't living up to, like, just such this rich potential that the first half of the decade kind of set up. But now I'm seeing a lot of cool shows, like I just watched The Expanse, show that Chris and I just got into, this Apple TV show called For All Mankind.
Yeah.
Lot of
Brilliant.
new and interesting, like, the kind of getting back to, like, kind of what the different storytelling possibilities that TV is capable of. Because it's funny, this is another point that I've brought up on multiple different podcasts, which is that the thing that I don't like, which is something that I will directly point the finger to, Netflix has done quite frequently, is I don't like when a show ends, not prematurely, but ends before it feels like it's had a chance to tell its complete story. Like, I don't think that every show needs to go on like 7 or 8 seasons, I just certain, so a lot of the stories just aren't meant to last that long,
Yeah.
And in fact, a lot of the reason why a lot of the TV that we enjoy kind of ends up going down is because, like, it kind of falls into that trap of just kind of going on longer than, like, the storytelling allows for it. So kind of, I guess, just the thing that I really enjoy about certain shows is that I like how they're able to kind of take those storylines and fold them and make them kind of, long term, but important, and like when you see details in later seasons that pay back to earlier seasons, stuff that like makes that doesn't like kind of satisfy your own personal viewing, but like makes the story worth it because it makes it feel like, okay, yes, all these hours that I put into this is engaging and this is investing, and this is worth getting into. And I'm already getting this sense from The Expanse, which I'm really, really excited about because it's something I haven't gotten from a show in quite a while.
Well, I remember when I was writing Fraggle Rock, we did 96 episodes over 4 seasons. And when it was ending, it wasn't because we were canceled. Jim decided 96 was enough. And so what that did was back then, and this is, in the late 80s, it's before we, back then shows just got canceled. This ended. But we were able to write an ending. Right, we had the last 4 or 5 episodes were building to a conclusion, quote unquote, not a final ending, but at least a satisfying payoff in a way. And that was unheard of back then. But we were able to do that because we knew that 96 was going to be the last episode. So we each, as writers, got to do our one final one, and that was sort of a summation of our particular interest in the show, and it was really great. So on the last day, I asked Jim, I said, why do you end it? Because I love doing this show, and I could have done it forever. And I said to Jim, why are you ending it? And he said, it's time.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And that took my breath away because he had the creative confidence to say, first of all, I don't need the job, so I'm going to take this creative train that I set in motion 4 seasons ago and let it end and let everybody be part of that and move on to the next thing. And it just moves me still that it wasn't any more complicated than that. It's time.
Yeah. That's I feel like that if that doesn't perfectly sum up Jim Henson as a person, then I don't know what does, because because no, you're right, because like, and it's funny because it feels like I almost like a lot of the shows that we see now are like kind of almost like more so hesitating towards that, because again, one of the things that set Breaking Bad apart is that Vince Gilligan said that, like, yeah, he knew exactly where he was going to end Walter White with Walter White, and that's what made the ending of Breaking Bad like so impactful. And like David Chase, like, he knew where he was going to end with The Sopranos as early as season 5. And there were like 3 more seasons of that show afterwards. And it's almost like all of these new show creators and showrunners that are pitching these shows, and again, I'm binging, and just the internet and technology has a lot to do with this. It's like the idea of, no, you're not just like throwing something out there and then it's just going to last for as long as it does until it gets canceled. It's like, no, you're telling a story. And it has a beginning, and it has a middle, and it has an ending. It may take longer than like a 2-hour movie, but like this is still a story, and these still things need to happen in order for this to be like kind of the rich, fulfilling experience overall that television should be.
I think that approach is much more common now, and the trick is getting to do it.
Right.
So like The Expanse was canceled after 3 seasons.
Right.
On Sci-Fi, and that was a real tragedy because the story wasn't over.
Right.
And thankfully it got picked up by Amazon, and so now they can tell the full story, right?
Exactly. No,
so I think that the approach is more like what you're talking about now. Every showrunner has a beginning, middle, and end in mind, and the challenge is to get to the finish line.
Right. Exactly. No, it's so funny because
sure.
Chris and I have talked about this nonstop, but we are forever going to be angry at Netflix for canceling Glow before they put out their 4th and final season. Because,
exactly. Yeah.
Because it was one thing. It would have been one thing if that show wasn't as beloved as it was, right? And it just ended. But it's the fact that not only was it beloved, and not only was it just a good show, but they had the 4th season. They were ready to go as far as production, and then that got shut down because of COVID. Sure, it may not have had the numbers to justify it, but it was the last season, but Netflix pulled the plug before they could like finish out their last season. Like that's
the roadmap was there,
right? That's the type of like kind of corporate thought process, I guess, that just I just don't understand. But that's only because I'm not in that position.
That's above my pay grade too. But you look at a show like Veep and how successfully they were able to end it.
Right.
They knew where they were going, and that last episode, or The Good Place, is another one.
Yeah, Good Place is a great example of a recent example.
They were able to tell the whole story, and then those final episodes. And MASH was the first one that really did this, right? Those final episodes, the whole world watches them because they want to see how this is going to end, and when it works, like on The Good Place or Veep or MASH for that matter.
The Americans, another really good recent example of how to end a show.
Like this is why I love television. It fills your heart. It's like the best movie in the world because you've been watching that movie for 4 years.
Yeah,
right, and that's exactly where I've always approached it from. I went to film school being like not laughed at by my fellow students, but kind of looked at in weird ways by just being the guy who was like, well, I mean, movies are great, but I don't want to just work on this character for hours and years and throw him away in 2 hours. I want to live with this guy,
When I was in film school and when I started my career, TV was disposable.
Right.
And that was the problem. Now, TV is permanent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
there's an argument to be made that TV is now more valuable than movies.
You can't see all the stuff that I did in the early '80s and 90s. They don't exist, and you'd have to go into the archives of the network to watch them. But now television lives forever, and it lives on multiple platforms. And I missed Schitt's Creek watching it week by week when it was on CBC. I'm binging it now. Watching half a season and in the evening kind of thing, and it's the best experience ever. And it exists, and my niece will be able to watch it 5 years from now. They're not disposable anymore, and that's the great thing about us in this modern era of television. Television has a weight to it, and it has a permanence to it. So it breaks my heart that the stuff I did. I mean, I'm so glad that Fraggle Rock for decades was lost, right? It existed as a DVD set, but who watched that, right? And then it got remastered for HD. I mean, we shot it in a quasi HD back then, but it wasn't screened that way on initially. But they remastered it properly for HD, and HBO Family showed it, and Amazon around the world showed it, and now it's on Apple TV Plus, multiple platforms, 3 years running. The whole world can watch what I did 30 years ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. I
mean, that's incredible to me. It doesn't exist for some of the Canadian shows that I did back then. But now creators and writers are making shows that will live on Netflix or wherever for decades. Who knows, right?
It's 100% true. Yeah. Now, one last question that I have to ask before we get out of here is that, I think Chris got bounced. What's it called? Is that, have you watched Community?
Yes.
Okay, so now my question
that died too soon.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more on that. Just as far as all that goes, but so I wanted to read you a quote that actually you watched the whole thing, right, when it came back to Netflix.
Not the Netflix. I mean, I watched the initial network full amount.
Right, yeah, because it ran for the 5 seasons on NBC, and then it got canceled, but then Yahoo TV picked it up for the last season. So in the final episode that aired on Yahoo, because Yahoo, the last 3 seasons were 13 episodes, and Yahoo picked it up for that last season of 13 episodes. And Abed, in the last episode, had this quote that just, I feel like, perfectly sums up the experience of TV, which is that his quote is, there's a skill to it. More importantly, it has to be joyful, effortless, and fun. TV defeats its own purpose when it's pushing an agenda or trying to defeat other TV or being proud or ashamed of itself for existing. It's TV. It's comfort. It's a friend you've known so well and for so long you just let it be with you, and it needs to be okay for it to have a bad day or phone in a day, and it needs to be okay for it to get on a boat with LeVar Burton and never come back, because eventually it all will. And if that doesn't sum up TV in a nutshell, I don't know what does.
Well, I mean, I agree with what he's saying. But remember that he's talking about a show, Community, that executed on a very high level.
That is true.
So their bad day is most other shows Emmy Award nominated.
Right.
Episode, okay.
Exactly.
And I was talking to the director where I'm shooting Transplant now, and Transplant's one of these shows where there's a whole phenomenon now where the fans live tweet while the episode is airing, and I realized watching the live tweets when the show airs. I was telling the director the other day, I said, the problem with this show now is that every scene's got to be a winner, because they're live tweeting as it shows. So every scene's got to be a winner.
Yeah.
You can't just have a scene where we phone it in. Every scene's got to be a winner. So the stakes are much higher now. But what I like to think is that the execution is also much higher, because we've got an industry that's been doing this for a long time. We've got all the talent in the world, and we'd also have, finally, we're sort of having the production values that didn't exist when I was starting out in television. Now the production values are, much greater than what feature films were. So there's it's still hard, but it's really satisfying now because we can do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it's just the things that they're doing on TV now and just what they're able to do. And again, like I was saying this back in 2016, like we got Battle of the Bastards, which 30 years before that would have been would have been like a movie. That was Braveheart 20 to 30 years before. And now we have Battle of the Bastards on an HBO show on a Sunday night. It's crazy just what we're able to get now.
We're living in a golden age of television, and frankly, I think television and movies have now merged into one thing, right? We're all watching them on a flat screen, on an iPad, or on a wall, or somewhere in our house. I mean, for me, the big tragedy is whether we'll go back to a movie theater anytime, because that experience is a whole other thing. But within the world that we've got now, post-COVID, which is, home screening, it's as good as it. I mean, how can it get any better? I mean, we got surround sound, we got the flat screen, or you can be in the bathroom and watch it on your phone. Like, who cares? It doesn't matter. The olden days, you had to huddle around this TV in the living room. It doesn't, no more. It's it's magic what we're living through now. We don't even know it, because I know it because I'm old. But what you guys are having now that you can take for granted blows my mind.
Yeah. That's that is the I guess the perk of being a millennial / Gen Zer now in the world. But sure. Chris, you have anything else you want to ask him before we jet on out of here?
No, Sugith, it was an honor. It was a pleasure. We really appreciate you spending some time with us. And before we let you go, is there anything that we missed along your journey? Any final, really just pieces of wisdom with the way this conversation went that you want to impart on us? And of course, let us know what people can expect and where they can find you on the internet to keep up to date, man.
Well, I don't know if I have any wisdom to impart that I haven't imparted already, but just to let you know that we're shooting season 2 of Transplant now, and hopefully that'll be on in the fall. Season 5 of The Expanse streams now on Amazon Prime, and season 5 of Kim's Convenience streams now on Gem in Canada, and should come to Netflix around the world probably in April-ish. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's what it's going to be. And I'm really glad you asked me to do this, because it was fun, and you guys have I love your enthusiasm, because I mean, you do this kind of stuff, and not that we aren't enthusiastic on the job, but to meet people who love what we do as much as we love doing it, it's great. So thank you for asking me to do this.
Absolutely, dude. It is an honor and a privilege, sirs. And we hope that this isn't the last time that you'll be back. We hope definitely that you'd like to come back. We tell this to every one of our guests. We're like, the first time, that's the professional interview. Then when you come back next time, that's when the yuck yucks. That's when the next time you come on, you're not like an interviewee. You're just a friend, and we just have you on, and we chat, and we go hard. Because I mean, you've been in the business for a long time, so I assume that, again, you love movies. So that's probably like what I'm sure you grew up watching movies, and that kind of was my last question for you before we got out of here is so technically 3 questions. So favorite movie, favorite TV show, and then what's something that you've watched recently that you have not been associated with that you really, really enjoyed?
Lawrence of Arabia.
All right.
Veep.
Nice.
Schitt's Creek.
Awesome.
Nice.
Perfect. Cut and dry. Nice.
Very cool.
That was awesome. Again, thanks once again to Sugith for being on. This was an absolute.
It breaks my heart that I was never in Schitt's Creek, though.
Oh yeah, I was about to say. I'm like, come on. I was about to ask. I'm like, were you ever in that show? But no. You weren't. Damn, they missed out. As far as I'm concerned, they missed out.
For real.
So
that's showbiz.
That is showbiz for you. Exactly. So, yeah. So before we get out of here, people, of course, we are the Talkin' TV podcast. Thanks once again to Sugith for being here with us. This was an absolutely incredible episode. Another incredible interview. Chris, how have we been able to lock down this many awesome interviews in like 2 months? How have we been able to do this? How has this happened?
I'm thankful to our community. I'm first of all thankful to the creators who we've been able to, in this case, pick their brains and gain some knowledge and perspective from. And honestly, man, I'm just thankful to have an outlet to sort of ask the questions that other interviewers don't get to ask or think to ask. So if you guys like this type of stuff, Sugith is obviously a really nice guy. We've had other amazing guests, guys. It only gets better if you hit that subscribe button and continue to support this show, because to be honest with you, we wouldn't be doing this on midterms week, at least for me, if we didn't love it. And it's because of you guys that sort of gives us the life force to keep pursuing this and, chopping down each tree that gets in our way when it comes to this show. But I do love the environment, so maybe that was a bad example, but whatever.
Look, we'd be doing this even if we didn't. Well, obviously we wouldn't, but we'd be doing this either way. The point is we love doing this shit too much. But you guys give us an outlet to do that. And again, you guys can let us know about what other ideas you want to see, what other guests you maybe potentially want to see from us by leaving a comment in the comment section below, clicking the like button, clicking the subscribe button, clicking the bell next with that way you guys get notified every time we put up new content. We have new content that we put up every Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This week is going to be a busy week for us because Chris, Sugith, I don't know if you were familiar with this, but it is my co-host's birthday on Wednesday. Going to be
happy birthday.
Yes,
thank you, man.
Big 2-7 right there. So we're going to be doing a big, fun birthday anniversary live stream on Wednesday night. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be super fun. It's going to be super chill, super casual. There might be some drinking involved. We're not sure, but there's going to be a ton of fun. We're going to be talking about all sorts of stuff. Like Chris, we've used previous live streams in order to kind of break down things that maybe you didn't know about me, but now we're going to get into stuff that I don't know about you. Yes, we've been working together a lot, but there's still a lot that I don't know about you, and we are going to tackle all of that on your birthday stream. And of course, this coming Friday, it's the big shebang, people. We've all been waiting for. We've been waiting these last 8 weeks for it. The WandaVision finale officially kicks off this month of insanity of just geek nerd influx of content that we're going to get. That is all happening on this coming Friday. Again, we're getting our next Marvel show, Falcon and Winter Soldier. 2 weeks after that, we're getting the Snyder Cut this month, unfortunately. And at the end of the month, we're getting Kong versus Godzilla, guys. It is going to be an absolutely insane, jam-packed month. We're going to have a ton of content to deliver for you guys, and there's going to be just a ton of content to watch, finally, after what feels like 2 months of dead space. So, with that being said, before we get out of here, Chris, where can the good people find you online?
Yeah, they can find me at Christian Evenko. I'm obviously working on my new album I've been telling you guys about over the past couple weeks, and it's going really well. So if you want little updates, if you want sort of the other side of my creative, endeavors, that's where you can find it, at Christian Evenko. Evenko spelled Evanko. Sugith just made my birthday by doing this interview. Thank you so much. I'm a huge Kim's fan, man, and Mr. Mehta is one of my favorite characters, and getting to meet the person behind these amazing characters that you play just further strengthens my love for the characters I see on screen. So thank you again so much, Sugith, for coming on tonight, man.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Movie Nerd Reviews, all one word, but you can really find me at the place where I put in the most amount of my effort, which is the Talkin' TV podcast, found on Facebook and Instagram at Talkin' TV Podcast, all one word, no G. That's where we post all of our stuff in order to keep you guys up to date and well informed on what it is that we have coming up. As always, people, thank you for tuning in. 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies and TV. We'll see you guys next time.